Good evening, Patriots, and welcome to the 86th audio file in the audiocast series known as the Q News Patriot. I am the Q News Patriot. My name is SGAnon. Merry Christmas and glad tidings of great joy to each of you out there around the world from here in the United States. You know, Patriots, as we look at the journey that we've been on these last several years, it is incredible to think that we've come yet again to the Christmas holiday season in 2024. On the doorstep, quite literally, to the last 3/4 of the 21st century and the last half of the decade, which we seem to be utilizing here in the Western world to wage a culture war against the globalist forces that seek to subvert our way of life and destroy humanity worldwide. Ever since the election of 11/5/2024, we know that those same globalist forces can simply not stand idly by and allow themselves to go quietly into that good night, because there is now nowhere in the world that is safe jurisdictionally, legally, or physically from the long arm of justice and the long memory of we the people. Patriots, we have a great deal to crunch with on our file today and to really chew over together. But one of the things I'd like to open with, if I could, in the spirit of Christmas, is a reading from the book of Luke. Actually, two readings. The first reading coming from chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, and the second reading will come from Luke chapter 2, verses 9, see here, through 20. The first reading, for there is nothing covered which will not be revealed, nothing hidden that will not be known. Therefore, whatever ye have spoken and done in darkness will be heard in the light, and that which you have spoken in the ear in closets shall be proclaimed from the rooftops. Second reading, the Christmas story as told from Luke's perspective. An angel of the Lord suddenly stood before them, and the glory of God flashed and shone around them, and they were frightened. But the angel said, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good tidings of great joy, which are for all peoples. Unto you this day in the city of David there has been born a Savior, who is Christ the Messiah. And this will be a sign for you. You will find a baby wrapped in swaddling cloth and lying in a manger." And then suddenly there appeared alongside the angel a multitude of heavenly hosts, praising God and singing, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among men." When the angels had gone away from them into the heavens, the shepherds began saying, "Let us go straight now to Bethlehem, and see this wonderful thing that has happened, which the Lord has made known to us." And they went in a hurry, and found their way to Mary and Joseph, and the baby as he lay in the manger. And when they had seen this, they made known what had been told them about the child. And all who heard it were astounded and in wonderment at what the shepherds had said. But Mary treasured all of these things, giving careful thought to them, and pondering them in her heart. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all that they had heard and seen, just as it had been told to them. You know, Patriots, when we look at the times that we're living, the promise that we have, the words of Luke in both of those instances ring very true to me. We are in a period of great exposure and declassification, what amounts to a soft awakening, an awakening that is only going to get more accelerated, more intense, and more dramatic as we go forward. And the second reading, of course, the Christmas story itself, the promise of goodwill amongst men at the end of this process and for ages to come. That is why we are here. That is why God sent us into this world at such a time as this, to be the hands and feet of the work of the above, to change the world into what it was always supposed to be. Without further ado, Patriots, let's go ahead and get right into it. We're going to start our file today with the most difficult topic that I've come across in my research and that I've now fleshed out and really, I think, decoded to a point of, I wouldn't call it certainty, but certainly a very convincing pattern that I've seen. And then we'll move into the military and financial events happening around the planet that I think are the reason for the coming false flag attack that many of us have been expecting. And with respect to this attack, we've seen nuclear waste materials disappearing in recent weeks. We've seen a number of different unidentified aerial phenomena happening across the eastern seaboard of the United States and the West Coast, as well as centralized areas and over Florida and properties that belong to President Trump. It's my opinion, and I've said this in recent videos, that I believe a great deal of these to be not UFOs, but man-made, very, very advanced military detection drones. Although I do not discount the fact that unidentified flying objects or unidentified aerial objects amongst those drones may in fact be extraterrestrial. I can't corroborate that, but I can corroborate that I believe as a result of the activities that we're experiencing right now on the ground and in the air, the coming false flag is going to be a radioactive event. And I also believe that that event will be targeted at the U.S. water system. Give me a moment here, Patriots. I'm going to pull up a post that showed up on the Chan research boards in May of 2022. I'm going to read the post, understanding, of course, that a great deal of the details may or may not hold true and hold any sort of water going forward. And then we're going to get into some of the other decodes behind this particular assertion. I have been wrong before. I'd like to caution each of you out there as I go through this process of reading and decoding this with you that you keep that in mind. The post reads, again posted 5/23/2022, the next false flag will be centered on the premise of malicious interdiction of nuclear source materials. It will not involve a nuclear device or a detonation, but rather a radiological event. Nuclear source materials will be deliberately leaked to target areas to inflict injuries through radiation exposure. The real number of casualties as a result of these attacks will remain low. The purpose is to create a new method of restricting freedom of movement and new policies that will enable the government to continue its expansion of power. The media will display images of attack survivors who will have burns and lesions across their skin. Videos depicting triage centers being overwhelmed with victims vomiting or unresponsive will be shared on social media. The threat of radiation exposure, an invisible enemy, will be used as the primary vector. An application modeled after COVID contact tracing will be installed on every mobile phone that uses iOS or Android. The application will serve to notify the user about potential hazardous exposure and recommend actions they should take, which will include voluntary testing. Additionally, cellular carriers will roll out automated SMS alerts that will have similar functionality. The application will interface directly with UICC on mobile devices. If the user does not have the application installed, network connectivity will be prohibited. New policies will grant governmental agencies further access to metadata and geolocational data through every platform. Included in these policies will be backdoor legislation that bans the use of end-to-end encryption. The legislation will be identical in nature to the recently introduced S3538 Earn It Act. These attacks will be localized to a specific region. Triage centers will be set up in the affected areas through the deployment of the National Guard and coordinating members such as FEMA. These triage centers will see moderate traffic. The narrative will continue longer than any possible threat. Despite offering no protection or even relevancy against a radiological threat, you will see another wave of people wearing cotton surgical masks in not just the target areas, but the entire United States. There will likely be severe disruptions to the internet through the use of addition rather than negation. Alternative sources of information will become overwhelmed with content generated by convolutional neural networks that support the narrative or use a carefully crafted opposition. Platforms that are incompatible with this system will be suppressed entirely on the infrastructure level. There will be organic service disruptions as a result of excess traffic. Videos will surface showing triage centers empty with the personnel staffing them sitting idle. This will threaten the overall narrative. The control of information will be required for the campaign to be successful. The perpetrators will not be an Islamic affiliated group or an evil incel domestic terrorist. It will have no relevancy to the ongoing Ukraine conflict either, but the blame will fall on all of these groups. The fog of war will surround information relating to the origin, and this will be intentional. The real attack will be psychological. Fear will be exploited, just like with the manufactured response to the COVID pandemic. Now, of course, reading that, Patriots, I immediately went to work trying to isolate what sort of vector would be most likely to experience a radiological threat or some sort of nuclear adjacent situation. And I've come to believe that the water supply or the air really represent the only two viable contenders. And Q has told us, of course, to watch the water. So based on that premise alone, and for no other reason, I went to work sort of seeking out different moments throughout the cinematic universes that have discussed radioactive contamination of the water supply or some sort of nuclear adjacent threat happening with respect to water or poison water, things of that nature. And the amount that I've found is really surprising. From a show called Alienators, The Evolution Continues, episode 4. Let me see here. Episode 4 is titled Don't Drink the Water, written by a gentleman named Ben Townsend, and originally aired immediately after 9/11 on October 6th of 2001. The plot line of that particular episode is the Alienators, a group of alien hunting scientists, take down a target at the Glen Canyon Dam. This results, however, in that target's DNA mixing with the water supply, which causes the local human population to mutate into creatures. Additionally, in 2022, the same year that that post was put out on the Chan boards, Netflix uploaded a documentary called Meltdown: 3 Mile Island. 3 Mile Island, for those of you that are unfamiliar, was an event that occurred at a nuclear power plant in the late 1970s. I believe it was 1979, where every alarm at the second reactor that began operating at the 3 Mile Island plant began going off in the early morning. Taken from Netflix's summary of the documentary, power plant operators and technicians realized that the water needed to cool down the reactor's radioactive core was no longer circulating. In a panic, they tried everything they could think of to prevent a meltdown. A similar meltdown had been depicted in the 1979 thriller The China Syndrome, starring Jane Fonda. Anons, it's worth keeping in mind that Fonda is an extension of the intelligence community and has often been utilized as a narrative preparatory individual. The film's success amplified the country's paranoia about nuclear catastrophe. Though the operators at 3 Mile Island eventually got the water circulating again, the core did not cool down fast enough, and there was a major concern that potentially deadly radiation was being released into the community. As this was occurring, the power company Metropolitan Edison, along with the NRC, which is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, assured the Pennsylvania governor that everything was under control. Panic, however, still ensued, and the governor eventually called for a partial evacuation of pregnant people and young children. Plant operators also discovered a hydrogen bubble. Thankfully, it did not explode. Though the community resumed their lives just 10 days, Anons, after the incident, evidence from the cleanup, which began 1 year later in June of 1980, found that the plant had come to within 30 minutes of a catastrophic and irreversible meltdown. Worse still, 3 Mile Island plant owner, General Public Utilities, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission knew about all of it and tried to hide it. So we've got a couple of very compelling, time lapses, or excuse me, evidence lapses overlapping here, Anons. Give me a moment here. I'm going to pull up the most compelling portion for me. This came directly from Grok. After reading that and going through a couple of other shows, Patriots, that have been aired in the child's cartoon arena, because that's often utilized as a preparatory framework, a karmic delivery system, if you will, including South Park, where they found a radioactive device being planted by Hillary Clinton. It's worth going and looking up that episode, Patriots. I turned to Grok and I decided to just ask the obvious question: did The Simpsons ever publish an episode with the plot of radioactive contamination of the Springfield water supply? And Grok's answer was very interesting. The answer was yes, The Simpsons did publish an episode that involves radioactive contamination of the Springfield water. In the episode titled Two Cars in Every Garage and Three Eyes on Every Fish from season 2, the plot revolves around Mr. Burns' nuclear power plant contaminating the local water supply, which leads to the emergence of Blinky, a three-eyed fish. This episode directly addresses the issue of radioactive contamination due to negligence at the Springfield nuclear power plant. So, Patriots, as I look at these decodes coming together, as I look at the events that Q has talked about, as I look at the necessity of really sledgehammering the consciousness of those sleepers that are still awake, but that are beneficial and patriotic, good souls in their own right and are willing to come around and assist us into the future, I'm looking at the overall picture emerging as this being the most likely false flag attack. It combines biological event restrictions and lockdowns. It combines public fear and panic. It certainly combines, the ability of restricted movement along with contact tracing. Contact tracing in this particular instance under a national emergency can be leveraged by the U.S. military, the U.S. Army, and specifically the National Guard for purposes other than just surveillance on every American. And Q has told us that the overall game board here, the overall attack methodology, excuse me, that's being deployed with respect to our black hat opponents essentially, centers around or leverages itself upon the usage of their technology, the usage of their evil apparatus, if you will, against them. And this particular process playing itself out would certainly be a way to introduce the need to facilitate President Trump into the presidency at a pre-inaugural period. If this were to happen prior to the January 20th event coming in early 2025, I don't rule out, Patriots, that something like this could happen in the days and weeks that follow President Trump's lawful ascension to power here in the country. But fundamentally, this is the event that I believe many of us have been waiting for, and it certainly satisfies a great deal of all of the conditions that would be needed to trip the U.S. military into a domestic operational capacity. Certainly Executive Order 13224, certainly 13848 because of interference with the electoral process, and 13818, all three of which were just recently extended within the last 90 days by the military cog known as Biden. Now, our black hat opponents, it's worth noting, Patriots, our black hat opponents are well aware that we are aware of the things that are coming, right? We're seeing the military communications happening from different pulpits. We're seeing, questionable flags, for example, flying up on the White House in recent days. The Army-Navy game from just a few days back, really at this point, just a couple of weeks ago now, where President Trump held an active commander-in-chief salute for quite a while with respect to the teams. The choice of lettering, the hangman's lettering on the back of the Army. We know that the Army National Guard, the Army is the martial law of the land under a warfare scenario. The Jolly Rogers that were communicated from the naval side discussing piracy, jurisdiction, corporate jurisdiction, maritime and admiralty law, all of those references, as well as mutiny, right? Mutiny is something that occurs whenever those compromised in control, certainly of very powerful institutions in the past, but I would submit that in today's day and time, potentially the U.S. government or high-level agency personnel inside the U.S. government, that also is a significant communication coming from the military with respect to that. So, all of this combining itself out, Patriots, we've seen in recent days and in recent weeks an escalation in the attacks against our side, against the honorable men and women that are out there attempting to help us, through this process. This coming from just the end of November, heroic response to a tragedy, soldiers receiving life-saving care after a bus crash. This was an accident that happened on the 12th of November, resulting in the injury of 10 U.S. Army Reserve soldiers who were from the 988th Quartermaster Detachment. That particular detachment is a unit of the Army Reserve. Let me see here. It's one of the three logistics branches of the U.S. Army, along with the Transportation Corps and the Ordnance Corps. Quartermasters are responsible for ensuring that equipment, material, and systems are all available and are in functioning capacity for missions. So that's clearly a hampering operation happening with respect to that, unfortunate crash there. Another article, this from just a couple of months before that, in August, helicopter crash at Alabama military base kills the instructor. This taken from just a few days ago. Military chopper catches fire during a routine training flight and makes emergency landing at Camp Pendleton. A military helicopter, a CH-53 Super Stallion, experienced an engine fire at 4:11 p.m. on Friday, prompting an emergency landing at Marine Corps Base Pendleton near the 5 freeway in Oceanside. This was from the 3rd Aircraft Wing. The 4 personnel on board were able to escape the burning bird without injury, but they were unable to put out the flames. And as to date, no answer has been offered as to why this occurred. And then, of course, this also just from a couple of days ago, or excuse me, this was from yesterday, U.S. fighter jet shot down by friendly fire. A U.S. Navy F-18 Super Hornet was shot down over the Red Sea on Sunday, December the 22nd, in an apparent friendly fire incident that involved the guided missile cruiser USS Gettysburg. For those of you out there that are familiar with history, you'll understand why that is so significant. In today's day and time, we have a fundamental, military on military struggle that's happening because many of these individuals, Patriots, understand that once this period of time is over, once this process returns to order, once we, the people, have transparency, accountability, and the expanded jurisdiction needed to go through and purge the system of corruption, of compromise, of bribery, of anti-humanistic agendas, that have been deployed against we, the people, many of them are going to end up in jail. They're going to end up without careers. They're going to end up criminally charged, and some of them may even stand before a capital punishment tribunal. One of the reasons that we're seeing a great deal of desperation in the world right now is exactly that reason: the threat of capital punishment, the threat of being caught up in things like violations of Geneva, the threat of being caught up in things like, the biological terrorism on the African subcontinent, for example. And with respect specifically, Patriots, to biological terrorism, one of the events that happened just in recent days was the assassination of Russian General Kirillov, who was over the chemical and biological warfare division, essentially, of the Russian military. General Kirillov has briefed the UN, at least one instance that I've seen. He's issued several different briefings to the world from the basically what looks like the operational headquarters of that particular division, discussing the evidence that they have found in Ukraine with respect to the Democrat Party of America, with respect to Valerie Jarrett, for example, the Barack Obama administration, many holdovers from that time period. And so this is a gentleman that just recently lost his life at the hands of an Uzbekistani terrorist who was paid $100,000 and communicated with the assassination coordination individuals in Ukraine, no less, through Telegram, the same vector that the US CIA opened a formal presence on in May of 2023. And what I find extremely interesting, perhaps coincidental, Patriots, is right around a month prior to this, USAID, which is one of the carbon slush fund cutouts for the Central Intelligence Community, MI6, and the NATO statecraft apparatus, donated more than $200,000 worth of lab equipment to Uzbekistan to strengthen, quote unquote, agricultural safety. Now, remember, it has been the Russian military that has been cataloging, Patriots, the use of the agricultural vector, the bioengineering, agricultural engineering sector. They've been cataloging the usage of that for biological terrorism, and that was one of the main reasons we saw a large grain carrying ship approximately 15 months ago now that was struck by the Russian military as it left the port of Odessa, headed for, ostensibly through the Istanbul Channel and down into the Mediterranean. And the Russians put out a statement through their military channels that the reason for that strike was that it contained pathogenic material. So this was a press release coming from the U.S. Embassy there in Uzbekistan with respect to this donation. Today, the U.S. Agency for International Development handed over lab equipment valued at $205,000 to the Plant Protection and Quarantine Agency of Uzbekistan. This donation is part of USAID's ongoing support to strengthen Uzbekistan's agricultural health infrastructure. So right there, it seems like we have a little bit of pie in the sky, because no one donates $200,000 of anything, worth of anything, Patriots, without expecting something in return. The new equipment, featuring advanced technology for secure data management, enhanced network security, and improved processing, will be used at, PPQA's Central Phytosanitary Laboratory. It will enhance the agency's ability to analyze plant health, ensuring that Uzbekistan meets international agricultural standards under the International Plant Protection Convention. So I find it very interesting, Patriots, the timing behind all of this, because if we recall, the terrorist event that occurred in Moscow on March, I believe, the 22nd, Skull and Bones Day, earlier this year, was conducted through the vector of Tajikistan, and it was the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, again, another extension of the U.S. State Department, just like the one I was reading from a moment ago. It was that embassy that published a formal press release 15 days prior to that particular terrorist event, discussing that American travelers should stay away from large events. They should stay away from very public concerts, from theatrical events, from public squares, and from athletic events. So it seems a bit undeniable to me, given the cross relation of interests here, and specifically the intersection of some of those interests, that we're going that the Central Intelligence Community, the American and really the NATO Western world intelligence apparatus, to include the CIA, MI6, and others, It seems impossible that they are not involved in this particular assassination. And the Russians have, of course, announced to the world by this point that they will hold both the perpetrator and those who plotted the perpetration, defining them as two separate entities. They will hold them all accountable in the end. This is an escalation period that we're seeing right now, Patriots, as we move into the next Trump presidency, because the world is aware that things are forever changing. The world is aware that the populist movement is here to stay, that the American people certainly managed to optically and publicly overwhelm a system that was designed to cheat at a Goliath scale. And that in and of itself, I think, is something to be extremely encouraged and heartened about. But we still have work to do, and people, from all across the planet and certainly different pulpits of power militarily and geopolitically understand that this process is only going to get a little bit more turbulent before it gets better. It's going to have to get a little bit uglier before it gets better. And so we're seeing the appropriate, the meeting of the forces, if you will, the action reaction gradient in real time between the patriotic actors here in the West and in the rest of the planet's military operations, as well as the black hat counterbalance to that, seeking to self-preserve. Now, allow me just a moment, Patriots, talking about self-preservation here. I'm going to shift our discussion just for a second to the events in the Middle East and the events in the financial world. One of the things I'd like to pull up for each of you all is something that I found rather remarkable and that I have to say I don't yet fully understand, but I'm willing to crunch on it with each of you just for a moment here. Let me pull this up. So this is a screenshot that I captured a few days back on the 12th of December when we saw this very unusual post come across the Department of Defense official U.S. government website. The post itself was only up for a number of minutes, but it was up long enough for a lot of individuals across the alternate media space and the podcasting and citizen journalism space to snag and grab hold of. And Patriots, if you've been decoding at this for any length of time, if we've been watching, again, the behavior of military forces around the world, it is impossible that something like this should happen so publicly with absolutely no purpose, especially at the same time that we're seeing what I believe to be a great deal of defensively postured military activities seeking to circumvent or mitigate that radioactive false flag event that I described just a moment ago. So I took the text of that particular post and decided to get a little bit, creative and clever with it and attempt to find where in the world or where across the vast trove of the internet we might have some amount of overlap, with respect to that. And what I found was very surprising to me. And I'm not 100% certain, again, how to fully interpret all of it. But if you'll allow me a moment, I'm going to pull up um, another very interesting connector back to this. Again, allow me just a moment here, Patriots. I'm trying to make sure that this comes through clearly. All right, on the screen before you is essentially an indicator chart, a tracking chart for what appears to be a DOD/USD cryptocurrency representation, some sort of token that seems to be connected to or made possible by, you'll have to forgive my lingo because I'm not a financial advisor, but this right here, this signal is called wrapped Ethereum. Wrapped Ethereum is utilized in the cryptocurrency space as a delivery vector for liquidity. And if we come over here to this particular screen, again, the same sort of chart pulled up on a different group here, this one called the DEX screener. This is your code that was posted on DoD's website. And it ties back to a DoD crypto token of some kind or a crypto representation, an extension essentially of DoD. Now, if we come down here to the transactional history, of course, on the 13th, the day immediately after that post went out, we saw this essentially opened. I don't know how that process works, but we saw this cryptocurrency representation or token or whatever you call it, brought into the fore as a reality. And 99.99 billion or 100 billion of them were created. We then saw a buy order initiated by this particular wallet here to the tune of approximately 8,000, not quite 8,000 US dollars. And that buy order made, again, possible through this wrapped Ethereum channel, and for this particular token was for 16.7 billion of those tokens. And so looking at that, that's 23, that's pain, that's a number of different, things. Then on the 16th of December, we saw the activity on this particular token go dark, and it's been dark all of the way up until the present day. And so what I find myself endlessly fascinated by, Patriots, is the possibility that that test post that came from DOD was not a test for some sort of advanced military computer program somewhere, but was in fact a trip code, or an introduction code, maybe is a better way to say it, for DOD to directly inject liquidity into a blended financial ecosystem. If that is the case, Patriots, it makes a great deal of sense why we would have a radioactive false flag on the horizon. It makes a great deal of sense why the National Guard has been active in recent days, or excuse me, in recent weeks, training for chemical and biological and radiological threats. It makes a great deal of sense why the 174th Air Attack Wing recently partnered with the Air Force Research Laboratory for cutting-edge innovation surrounding multi-service joint experimentation with advanced technological capabilities and solutions. And some of those are multi-domain, and the civilian domain is referenced in the article published on af.mil. It makes a lot of sense why the Maryland Army National Guard would activate its first intelligence and electronic warfare battalion less than 6 weeks ago, right? Going through this entirety of this process. And it makes sense to me, Patriots, why we would have a number of different joint force efforts being made inside the U.S. military, because we have both the need to prevent certain kinetic events, but also the need to spearhead, to build out, to be the pioneers blazing, if you will, through the jungle to that new ecosystem, to that new way of life. And that is something that our enemies cannot stop, and that has them, I believe, absolutely terrified. It's worth noting, Patriots, that more than 24 states have already promised National Guard troops for Washington, D.C. with respect to the upcoming presidential election, or excuse me, the upcoming inauguration and the presidential election that just occurred. The District of Columbia, according to this article coming from mainstream media, has not made any formal requests for those troops, but officials across the entirety of the government have been preparing for the possibility that the Capitol could again need the U.S. National Guard on site. And of course, the rest of the article is a lot of fear mongering with respect to January 6th and things of that nature. So Patriots, this is an incredibly exciting and exhilarating time. When we look at the counterintelligence warfare that's panning out right in front of our very eyes, when we look at the back and forth that's panning out right before our very eyes, when we look at the events that are yet to come that stand to completely reshape and redefine the entirety of American life, that certainly stand to trip, certain national emergencies like EOs 13224, 848, and 818, amongst others. It makes a great deal of sense to me that as we move through this period, this is the period of reflection. This is the period of playing the game of chicken, if you will, for keeps. And this is the period of time where we, the people, supporting one another through citizen journalism, through honest on-the-ground reporting, through the circulation of information, we will negate every narrative, every attack, every obstacle that comes in our path. If God be for us, who in the world could be against us? And though 10,000 may fall around us, it shall not come near us, because we are on a mission and a purpose, protected and chosen for such a time as this. Again, the U.S. Army, with respect to the Army-Navy game, reminded our enemies that all traitors will hang. Piracy comms, Jolly Rogers, clear references to maritime, commercial, and admiralty jurisdiction were also included in that same game segment and in some of the advertisements. This is an incredible period of time, Patriots, where one side will eventually win out, and the other side will be forced to acknowledge defeat and accept justice. We, the people, are God's hands and feet here in the world, and I am tremendously excited to bear the brunt of this storm that's coming with each and every one of you, because on the other side, is a dawn the likes of which we've not seen in an age. Patriots, as we conclude our file today, I hope you will sit back and relax and enjoy your Christmas season. I hope you will be appreciative and thankful for all of the incredible gifts and blessings that have fallen upon us in the Western world for so long, despite the fact that such evil has been perpetrated in the background without our knowledge and against our will. That changes with us. That changes with the period of time we're in. And nothing could be a greater gift to the children of the future than the awareness that we are all collectively forming. I'll be back with each of you again soon on the Q News Patriot, everyone. God bless. Merry Christmas. This is SGAnon. Thanks. Bye-bye.